Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is another brand new episode of Liam's First Look. And this week, we're talking, of course, about UFC Luque versus Dos Anjos. I want to say right off the top, this is an interesting matchup, but it's a matchup that I did note that red flag in my Vicente Luque document some time back, which was that there was a medical report released that he had brain hemorrhaging during his last fight. That means he was bleeding inside of his brain. So extremely terrifying stuff to hear. I'm a huge Vicente Luque fan. So first and foremost, just as a guy who's concerned about his health and safety, that's terrifying stuff. However, when you're pursuing a career in prize fighting, the fact that you're getting hit in the head, these kind of traumas, they definitely happen. And sometimes I think I'm too quick to pull the trigger on thinking somebody might be done in the sport. For example, Dan Hooker is a guy that comes to mind for me where his durability in that fight that he had against Jalen Turner was incredible, where he's fighting through the fact that he's got a broken jaw, but his cut down to 145 was so significant that he took just a couple punches and he was not able to stay in the fight there. So I think that, this is a really tricky fight for me to break down on paper. And I just want to disclose my bias up front. I'm a big Vicente Luque fan, but RDA on the other side is nobody to be trifled with, right? He's a former UFC champion. He's a guy who's competed well at 2 weight classes, won rounds against Colby Covington. What more can you say about the guy than he's an absolute legend of the sport? But I think that we've got a fascinating fight, and I'm excited to break it down with you guys. So want to shout out the chat first and foremost. We got 16 people rocking with us live, barely any announcement. So these are the people I know, ride or die homies. Shout out to Pepe Sylvia in the building, one of New York's sharpest, New York represented on the t-shirt today, but also just one of the sharpest guys out who's tracking these bets. Third party, does an incredible job. So if you guys aren't familiar with his work, make sure that you check it out. You should be following and familiarizing yourself. Very sharp guy in the space. Does a lot of things right. Shout out to our guy Dix Insider here early. I wanted to answer your question, my brother. I saw this before we got started. Liam, why did Cody Durden not tap? He's of course referring to the fights that happened last week. Was the angle not right on that triangle armbar? I mean, part of that was the fact that Cody Durden was being a savage and just refusing to tap when his arm was extended. A lot of times in jiu-jitsu competitions, or even just in life in general, in the room, when you're rolling, things like that, you don't have to finish moves. You get to the winning position, the person realizes I can't get out. And so they concede and move on, and Cody Durden didn't want to concede. You're going to have to break his arm to get the victory there. And the thing about the triangle armbar is that it's fantastic for creating a dilemma. Look at Diego Lopez, right? How he was able to submit a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Who's very talented. He got to a triangle. He used a triangle armbar series, to create his breaking mechanics, to get to a dominant sweeping position. His triangle was locked in. There was no real path out for Gavin Tucker. The time was one factor for Cody Durden, late in the round. Both guys are sweaty. It's round 2. A couple things that may have helped him. Maybe if they're dry, it goes a different way. But the thing was, the ultimate finishing mechanics, he was, I believe, hip down. I'd have to rewatch it. But just for memory, I think he was hip down trying to finish. There comes a point where you can't really extend too much further with your hips because you're facing the floor. So you have to start creating torque and pulling up. And again, you're dealing with a guy like Cody Durden, if he can get any kind of grip, like a wrestler, he will try and hold on for dear life. So I just felt like you saw a guy who really resisted. And, maybe Hadley, if he was able to create a little bit more downward pressure, would have been able to break the arm. But ultimately, a guy like Durden, he just stayed really tough, really disciplined, really patient. And I think that he just was a guy who would not be denied that night. I think that's how he fought the whole time. I think he fought as good or better than he's ever fought before. So God bless him for it. Just a fantastic performance by Cody Durden there in a really tough spot. And, my first look last week, I talked about Cody Durden and his ability to win that fight via wrestling. But then when I watched the tape, I was so impressed by Jake Hadley that I ended up coming around to his side. The thing was, in hindsight, he came over from England. He had the flight over here, probably some things that weren't advantageous for him. And his cardio seemed a little bit taxed there, something that you don't normally see from him. So I think there's a lot to digest from that fight. I think both guys project like very successful flyweights. They both have a good game. For Hadley, he's just got to be more disciplined about keeping fights upright or getting to the top position. His jiu-jitsu is fantastic. He's got great guard game as well. You saw how he submitted Carlos Hernandez with that overhook triangle series. I'm trying to work on that myself, a little bit in the training room after seeing it. I thought it was beautiful setup. So I think that when you look at those kind of things, I take away that both guys are really talented, better than maybe we gave Cody Durden credit for. And I think that they project high. Cody Durden is a guy that, used to make a lot more fundamental mistakes. And I think in the past, he may have tapped in that situation as well. And I think he's just been getting better. He's been getting more confident. He's been getting more committed. So I think that that's really something to look forward to. Shout out to our guy, Diehard MMA says, normal humans tap there. I'm upset about it. Brother, I feel you. And I know you were close on that submission long shot ticket as well. So that's just gutting. It's always the ones that the shortest props that end up blowing it. I believe that was the shortest prop for you as well, Clint. But I've had that happened to me in the past, so I'll get it. So, in any case, I think that Ben is right here. Durden has exceeded expectations. I think that's a great point. Shout out to our guy, Royal George says, great show, Liam. Don't always get to watch the show live, but we'll watch your show each week, mate. Great show. New York boys in the building. You know it, George. Appreciate you for that. So right back to this card, guys. Vicente Luque and Rafael Dos Anjos. I'm going to read you guys exactly what I sent on Patreon 3 hours ago, because I try and come up with my gut feel, write it out, and write out a quick synopsis. 1, 2, 3 sentences at the very most about how I feel about these fights. And I said my lean here is Luque plus 105. I think if doctors are letting him get back in there, he's probably going to show up okay. And I think he trains with great guys. I think he's got underrated jiu-jitsu, and he's got all the anthropomorphic advantages in this fight. Again, quoting from the Patreon here, Luque, a BJJ black belt with all anthro advantages, 3 inches of height, 6 inches, of reach, and 7 years younger. You look at RDA, he's a guy who's bouncing back and forth between the 155-pound class and the 170-pound class, right? And I think that you can never see Vicente Luque at 155 pounds. I mean, he missed weight in his in his backup spot for the welterweight title shot because he's so big. It's hard for him to make it unless he's got real reason to get down to the weight. So I think that for size here, there's a big disparity. And Vicente Luque, I used to call him the death dealer of the welterweight division, right? This guy touches people with the left hook at a certain point in the fight and they shut off, and I think that is a factor that people might be forgetting here. As RDA is starting to creep towards that age where the knockouts become much more likely. He's had some favorable matchmaking, in terms of the Brian Barberena fight. He's world-class on the ground. But again, Vicente Luque has been a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for quite some time. He's the plus money underdog here with a lot of advantages. So the things that are scary and the things that are red flags, and the reason that we're getting a plus money tag here on Luque, in my opinion, is because Luque had the brain hemorrhaging, and that is a massive unknown. And so if he got knocked out in this fight, maybe that shouldn't be all that surprising. But RDA is not known for his power punching. He's known for his wrestling and his grappling and his takedown series. And I just think that at a certain point here, he could get clipped. He could get out volume potentially on the feet. Luque has struggled at times with southpaws, but I feel like it's southpaws that can hit him with clean power. And I'm just not sure that RDA at this stage of his career is really the most dynamic power offense on the feet. So I think the UFC may strategically be matchmaking this here. As far as I'm concerned, I just think that this is a winnable fight for Luque if he is still the Vicente Luque of old. And that's the unknown here. But what we know about RDA is that he's a great fighter who could make 155 pounds, and he's getting up there in age, and he's starting to hit that tipping point where, like we've talked about before on this show, in Fightnomics, it says, fighters over 38 years of age. The graph just goes like this, guys, in terms of how many incidences of knockout. So you're telling me that Vicente Luque, the death dealer of the division with a massive left hook, couldn't potentially knock out RDA in this fight? I think he could. Even you watch the Fiziev fight. Fiziev was having some struggles there, but he was able to keep a good base. He was able to keep himself upright. I know he's an elite lightweight, but then he was able to land big shots, especially down the stretch, and really hurt him. And Vicente Luque, say what you will, he went, with the number one contender, Bilal Muhammad, 5 hard rounds. He knocked out Bilal Muhammad. He's one of the very few people to ever do that. So the idea to me that Vicente Luque is like a fish out of water in this fight, I don't buy it. So for me, the leans here, Luque plus 105 and the under 4.5. I think the under 4.5 kind of covers most outcomes where Vicente Luque just looks like a shell of himself. But who knows, So the final thing here was Luque big red flag in the form of brain bleed versus Jeff Neal. That was the other thing I mentioned on Patreon as well. I think that is something that's important to note. But I kind of want to see what his spirits are like, what he looks like during fight week. But I feel like we're going to get a very honest fight here, where the younger guy with a bunch of advantages is at plus money. So I don't know. I'm finding that a little hard to ignore. No bets on the fight for me at this point. Waiting for a little bit more information. But yeah, I'm tempted by the Luque side, I must admit. Moy says there isn't an unknown. When you suffer brain hemorrhage, the clock starts ticking as you lose millions of brain neurons per minute. The doctors who cleared him within standard among us normal humans, not professional fighters. Luque is not the same. Fair play, man. I mean, I think that the Jeff Neal fight was brutal. But so if anything, maybe I lean more towards that under then. In any case, I just felt like this was a matchup where it was kind of forgiving. I do think there's reason to fade him against power punchers in the future. By the way, I did pick Jeff Neal and Vicente Luque, one of my favorite fighters. But when you look at that matchup on paper, Jeff Neal hits like a truck. Luque is not going to take it to the ground, and he struggles a little bit against southpaws that have power. So I'm like, yeah, it's probably a bad matchup for him. I don't know. But in any case, I think that I'm just going to wait and see here. No bets for me, but kind of lean towards the underdog here. Next up, we've got the co-main event. Be a little bit more brief on this fight. Hakeem Dawodu. He's been out wrestled a couple times in the UFC. He's been out grappled a few times in the UFC. On the feet, he tends to be pretty menacing. Dawodu lost he won the Zubaira Tukhugov fight by split decision because he was so aggressive down the stretch, walking him down. Stop running! One of my favorite moments in UFC history. That was awesome. It was a really gangster performance, if you will. And the Trezano fight, I thought was a fine performance from him as well. But he hasn't looked, his best, I would say, in some of these recent fights. Rogue Strummer. A blast from the past, my man. Love to see you in here, brother. He says, don't sleep on Jose Johnson, boys and girls. Plots and no pride. Fruit is good for you. Weigh-ins, we'll see. Shout out, my brother. Good to see you back in here. Pleasure to see you. Thoughts on Luque sub plus 1,000 bet online versus plus 450 to 500s on some U.S. markets. I don't know what to make of that. I'll have to see how that market opened. And I'm curious to see if it opened similar and got bet down on some of the U.S. markets. That's a curious thing for me. But honestly, I would be a little bit more surprised if he won this fight by sub than if he won it by knockout. I just don't think he's like a complete mark on the mats. I think that's kind of a misconception. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic stuff. Back to this fight, though. Hakeem Dawodu, I don't expect him to get out wrestled in this fight by Cub Swanson. And Cub Swanson, he's almost 40 years of age, guys. He's like 39 3/4. He's a guy who's really struggled in fights where people are getting off on big offense and can sustain it. He had a competitive boxing fight with Kron Gracie, who came back and looked career worse, unfortunately, in his subsequent bout. Daniel Pineda, he's a guy that he got a win over. Another older guy, kind of an age contemporary, if you will, not as experienced in the UFC. And then he beat Darren Elkins. And I mean, Darren Elkins, with all due respect, is a guy who's on the back nine of his career. He's a guy who's, interesting. We got Pepe saying Hakeem TKO 2 or 3 small for me. Yeah, man. I think that's a fair look in this fight. You look at Cub Swanson and he honestly is still very skilled in his offense. He's very dynamic, but I just don't think that he could take the same damage on the comeback at all anymore. I think he's very vulnerable, both to leg kicks, to body strikes, and then to head strikes as well. We've seen him submitted in the UFC. I was kind of surprised, by the Dawodu sub numbers as well, just because I think that he could club and sub him, at a decent rate in this fight. So for me, I feel like Hakeem probably ends up taking him out, and I lean towards Hakeem pretty strongly in this fight, just based on the fundamentals, if you will. From Patreon, lean Dawodu ITD, Cub Swanson, damn near 40 years old at featherweight. Probably KO'd due to the over 38 years of age factor. Mean Hakeem, capable of blowing decisions on takedowns, but his striking stats are valid. So that's kind of what I'm looking for here. Ben says he likes the under here at plus money. Dawodu, not much of a finisher in UFC. Cubs' durability looked very concerning lately. I don't trust Dawodu's chin either. I think that's fair play, brother. And Andrew saying, what the F, round 3 plus 800? Very interesting. If Swanson were to get a finish, what's most likely, KO or sub? I just don't really see Cub Swanson as a very proactive grappler. He likes to strike, man. I feel like if he takes him out, it's probably via knockout. But Hakeem has more deficiencies on the mat than on the feet. But again, it's just a styles thing. I feel like it'd probably be more likely to be a knockout. Next up, guys, Khalil Rountree and Chris Daukaus. This is a really volatile fight for me. Not a very high confidence pick, but the lean here for me was Daukaus plus 162. I feel like he has more of a chance to come in with some upside here in terms of his ability to mix it up with the wrestling and the grappling. Trains at Martinez BJJ. He's not going to go out there and out wrestle an Alexei Olenek, a Shamil Abdurakhimov, and all these other guys that are bigger heavyweights or good at grappling. And I think that, he just got nuked against the Derek Lewises of the division, against the Biggie Boy, Jairzinho Rosenstrike. Those guys are just going to put a beating on him because of the size. I kind of was on the Daukaus train. I rode the Daukaus train the whole way up. And then I kind of, realized after the Derek Lewis one, I was like, okay, there's a ceiling for how far this can go at heavyweight, just having fast hands and moving around, using your head movement, because he felt too much pressure. When he was getting, pressured by these heavyweights. And so he was just trying to hold up his hands and not take the brunt of the shots. And that's a path to nowhere, right? It's just not going to work in the heavyweight division. Where he's good is when he gets off on his offense. And I think Khalil Rountree is a guy who's a confidence fighter. If you let him go out there and build into his confidence, he's very dangerous. But some guys were able to break his confidence in the early going and get the win. And I look at, Marcin Prachniow was able to keep some pressure on him, make him uncomfortable in that fight. You look at Iwan Kutalaba. He got rocked several times in that fight, but he just kept coming forward, reaching for takedowns, trying to put him on the ground. And eventually Khalil just was running out of answers, and didn't want to keep getting up. They were not sophisticated takedowns, guys. They were like just kick your legs out trips and things like that, pushing the head down and forcing him into a dogfight. And that made it really competitive. And I think when you look at a guy like Daukaus, he struggled with more athletic archetypes in the past. So that could be a problem here. But I look at a guy who could have potential upside at 205. And he looks to me to be getting down to the weight in the right way. Looks like he's gone through a total body transformation in terms of his Instagram and things like that. So there was some things that I liked about it. I do think there's a chance he gets boinked in the first round, no doubt about it. But I think he could do the boinking in the first round. I think he could knock out Khalil. I think he could take down Khalil and make it an interesting fight, where Khalil doesn't really like to be on the ground. And I think he would look like the much bigger fighter if this fight hits the mat and how he's able to control it. But I just don't know exactly what to expect. Khalil Rountree, Bang Tao Khalil, whatever it is, Muay Thai Khalil, whatever you want to call him. They like to come down and, he comes down and bears down on people with strikes when he's at his best. But when he's not at his best, he kind of just doesn't look like himself. He can give very inconsistent performances. So on 3 straight wins, he's got some momentum. We'll go to the Patreon breakdown here. I said super tricky fight. Khalil momentum, 3-fight winning streak, suspect wrestling. Then I said Daukaus, former heavyweight, now 205, good hand speed, potential grappling upside. That's how I see this fight. I would be surprised if Khalil had grappling upside, right? So for me, the plus money, the unknowns would lead me to a dog or pass situation. I think Khalil is a popular guy. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's kind of had some public exposure. But shout out, Rogue Strummer says Khalil in the middle of a career resurgence. He could physically manhandle Chris. He hits like a monster truck. No doubt about it. That is fair play. He is also a model. Shout out Moy's Audio. I saw that as well. I think IMG Models or something like that. So he's got a modeling gig. He's doing a lot of things. And we're going back to Rogue Strummer here. He says, I think Khalil, way higher level fighter than Daukaus, different caliber of athletes. I do agree there. I don't rate Daukaus wrestling. Very nice. He was average prior to chin being gone. Fair play, man. I don't know exactly that his chin is gone, but I do think that he's proven he's not capable of taking power in the heavyweight division. So this is a fight where two guys, very similar records, but yeah, I definitely see the athletic upside for Khalil, but he just seems to me like a very public guy this week. That's my personal opinion. I haven't bet on the fight though. So for me, just kind of curious to see where this line ends up. Don't feel like I need to play this fight, but I kind of lean towards the Moy says the speed advantage will be done gone. I feel you. I don't think he's going to be faster necessarily. I do think, though, that Khalil kind of picks his shots, especially with the hands in the early going. And I think that the thing that was really good about, him at his best is when Daukaus comes out throwing, he could just barnstorm guys and get them out of there in the early exchanges. So I just don't want to underrate his ability to box. I think he can box. And I think Khalil sometimes starts a little bit slow. Diehard says, Liam, if it helps, Daukaus said his game plan against Jairzinho was to grapple. Wouldn't be shocked if it was to here. Yeah, me either. He's been posting a lot of wrestling pictures, a lot of grappling pictures. And I think that that's what you're supposed to do. Look at the Tyson Pedro fight. Tyson Pedro got absolutely blasted in that fight. Looked like he was out, gets a takedown, and then the fight's, completely different. So that's what I'm looking to see here is can Daukaus get his career back on track? But yeah, maybe they're just building out the Khalil highlight reel. Next up, we've got Polyana Viana taking on Iasmin Lucindo here. And for me, this is a fun one. Polyana Viana went out there and got the knockout against Jin Frey in her last fight. I want to pull up my previous bets on these fighters because I haven't checked yet for this week. So shout out to Bet MMA, keeping us honest. Next up, it was Polyana Viana against Mallory Martin. I had the round one. We made some good coins there. But I also faded her in the UFC. I took Tabitha Ricci 2 units at -110. And I bet Polyana Viana ITD last time out for 1 unit against Jin Frey and 1 unit by sub. So I have been, having pretty good reads, I feel like, on Polyana Viana's fights. I think that when she gets women that are a little bit older and or a little bit chinny, like Jin Frey, like Amanda Hebos, whom we love on this show, so no disrespect there, but just people that can't take a great punch. Polyana Viana is a mean girl. She'll come out there and she'll throw big shots and try and take you out on the feet. And I think that sometimes goes underrated. That's why I bet the ITD in that spot. I thought the equity was there. Somebody's driving past with absolutely loud music. I hope you guys can't hear that. But in any case, we've got Polyana Viana, 5-0 career to the knockout. So very impressive for WMMA standards. 8-1 career to the submission. She was submitted. People will remember, I think, by Veronica Hardy. That was back in 2019 after she had already had a couple fights in the UFC. By the way, she lost a split decision to Hannah Cyphers where she was dropped, knocked down back in the day. So that I found interesting as well, looking over the stat line. She's capable of giving up takedowns. She's capable of getting submissions. She's got a great armbar in the first round. That's how she tends to win her fights, either knockout or armbar in the first round. But I don't believe she's ever won a decision. 0-4 guys on the scorecards, 3 of those in the UFC, 1 prior as well on the regional scene. Lost to 7-6 Aline Saddlemeyer back in 2014. So she has always been losing these decisions. Judges have never seen it her way, but she is a girl that can make it competitive. The Tabitha Ricci fight, Tabitha, who is a good grappler, who is competent, was very cautious in that fight. Didn't want to engage too close. She wanted to make sure she kept a comfortable distance. I think Polyana Viana was doing some training in South Florida. She's listed at Tata Fight Team according to our friends at Tapology. But let's go ahead and look at Polyana Viana here. Yeah, it doesn't seem like she's posting any training stuff recently. So hard to say there. I'm looking at her tag photos to see if she's been tagged in any gym pictures recently. Not seeing that either. Most recent one, 2 weeks ago. Oh, is this Shootbox? Yeah, she's training at Shootbox Diego Lima, it looks like. Very interesting. So training over there with Charles Oliveira, the champ. Some good work I'm sure to be had there. So that's an interesting spot. And she is coming off that big knockout win, so certainly a little bit of momentum here. But I think Iasmin Lucindo is a real prospect on the other side as well. So let's talk about her a little bit. She got the win last time out over Brogan Walker, without issue, I would say. I think that the only thing that I didn't like, I think the only thing I didn't like in that spot was Brogan Walker, is probably a girl that I projected her to finish against, and to not go out there and get the finish against Brogan, I thought was a little bit of a letdown. But in any case, she fought to the decision with Yasmin Waregi. And the one thing that is not great there is that win, or excuse me, that loss is kind of not aging as well as I thought it would. I still think highly of Yasmin Waregi, but she got knocked out in the first round by Denise Gomes. She was dropped by Estela Nunez. So I think that there's some reason to think that maybe Yasmin Lucindo's power isn't translating quite as well as I thought that it would, because she does have 8 wins by knockout on the regional scene. So she's a girl that, maybe it's just she hasn't gotten there yet. Maybe we're going to see that in future fights in the UFC. But that's the one thing that makes me a touch nervous here. So the things I was kind of looking at for this fight was, my lean was Yasmin Lucindo. I just don't think that I can get to the price here at the minus 190 tag. I think that there's too much volatility for me. These are both young enough women. Let's take a look here at the intangibles. 10 years younger for Yasmin Lucindo, but Polyana Viana, is still only 31 years of age. So she has a chance to make a run at this point in her career, but the flaws are there. The takedowns, she's going to give those up. And I think that Andrew does make a fair point. Brogan kind of just survived that fight and ran away. I'm not going to even say that. That's a fellow Team Henzo Gracie member. But in any case, I feel you, Andrew, for sure. Pepe says, not me searching Polyana IG again for capping purposes only. Absolutely. I see what you mean. Polyana Viana, a very eccentric individual, very open on Instagram about her thoughts and feelings, let's say. But in any case, she does have losses to the JJ Aldridges, Hannah Cyphers, Veronica Hardys of the division, and her wins are over Jinyu Frey on the back end of her career, certainly. Mallory Martin, not really a high-level UFC fighter. Emily Whitmire, I believe she's been cut from the organization. People have not flattering nicknames for her. Maya Kahunahunahulale. I'm not even trying to be rude. I cannot pronounce that. Kahuna Lele. I'm trying to get it, but in any case, I don't know who that is, right? And I watch the UFC every weekend. That was back in 2018. She did not stick with me. I do not remember that woman's fight. So overall, she hasn't fought very high level competition in the UFC, and when she did tend to fall short. She's a dangerous girl, has good wins, but for me, I just feel like Yasmin Lucindo kind of projects higher. She's still very young with so much experience, and I like younger fighters with experience. But I also got to say this. I do prefer when they're at an underdog price tag. So for me, that's what's probably going to keep me off a bet here. But maybe looking at the under 2.5 rounds, kind of interesting. If you like the Viana side, especially, she tends to be a finisher, and she has no wins by decision yet. So just something to keep in the back of your mind there. Would give you equity if somehow Yasmin Lucindo was able to get her first finish. Maya Stevenson, bro, Joe Daddy's old lady, he says. Oh, okay. Good shout, Evan. I didn't know that. So appreciate that. Big Show Pick says number 21, caught you live finally. Appreciate you big time, Big Show. We got 52 people here rocking with us live. So please drop a like on the video. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, talking fights all the time on this channel. We did very well. Me and my guy Gordo breaking down Contender Series. Make sure you subscribe to him as well. Plays and Fades on YouTube. We're going to be there next week breaking it down. But all things considered, I'll read you guys my final thoughts here from Patreon. Lucindo started MMA very young, lost a few fights by sub, but it was all to fairly quality opposition. If you look back, the girls that beat her, I think the same girl beat her twice by sub, and then she lost to a girl who's in the UFC now, and I think she was 16 when they had that fight, maybe 17, very young. So I think that's forgivable, and I think she's been putting in a lot of time and training on the ground. Curious to see that. Viana, only one finished loss. It was via armbar in the first round in the UFC. A little bit of loss parity. Exactly. She got a little bit of her own medicine in that one, eh? But she also is 0-4 in decisions. 5 and 8 of her UFC fights have ended in round one. That's just remarkable for the women's side of things. So those were my thoughts overall on that fight. Next up, let's move to the Tafon and Chukwi and AJ Dobson fight. So I got to say first and foremost about AJ Dobson, he is fighting out of Powell, Ohio. So Northeast Ohio in the building. Baldwin Wallace represent. Northeast Ohio represent. You guys know how it is. But in any case, I think that AJ Dobson, he's got a pretty rough matchup here. When you think of what AJ Dobson does really well, he's a guy that's got explosive, athletic potential. He's a guy that lifts heavyweight. He's a guy that moves dynamically. He's a guy that can knock people out. He's a guy that's got finishes. But he's 31 years of age. He's a guy that has struggled so far with two different archetypes in the UFC, right? So you look at Jacob Malkoun, and Jacob Malkoun's a good fighter, but what do we see as a problem? He's getting taken down a bunch. And Jacob Malkoun was able to even land on the feet, if I remember. I'm pulling up UFC stats right now. But Jacob Malkoun is kind of a way different matchup. Pulling this up right here. Malkoun, 6 takedowns, 80 significant strikes landed to just 52 on the comeback from AJ Dobson. So he's not landing that many strikes. Granted, he got taken down a bunch there, but how about this? He fought Armin Petrosian, who's a kickboxer, who's a guy that wants to keep it on the feet. He wants to stand up with you. And what happened in that fight? He absorbed 118 significant strikes. He got 3 takedowns, 58 significant strikes of his own. Not going to be able to win fights like that. And so I look at this fight and I say to myself, Tafon Nchukwi is a guy that is, I believe, from Team Lloyd Irvin. I think he's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he comes from a judo background. He's a guy that is explosive, athletic himself. He can throw people. He can knock people out. And he's been more of a decision fighter so far in the UFC. That no doubt about it. But when you look at who he's fought, let's go back and run the record here on Tafon Nchukwi, because he's 2-3 so far in the UFC, but he lost to Carlos Ulberg, who's a real prospect right now at light heavyweight, who's winning fights violently by knockout in the early going. And he's maybe not as proven on the ground, but he went out there and just landed big shots early. And it was at a time when people weren't rating a Carlos Ulberg, but I think now maybe people are putting more respect on his name. Asmat Mirzakhanov, the professional, he looked like he was winning that fight, at various points. He looked like he could have beaten Asmat Mirzakhanov, got caught with an insane jump knee in the third round, goes down there. So that's the problem for him. And does he have the best wins in the UFC? No, he does not. But lost a majority decision to Jin Young Park that was quite competitive, if my memory serves. Let's pull up his UFC stats. So against Jin Young Park, Jin Young Park got 2 takedowns, 2 submission attempts, and 71 significant strikes, limited Tafon to just 58. But Tafon against Jamie Pickett landed 120 significant strikes. He landed 47 significant strikes and a knockdown on the Contender Series before winning the fight by knockout. He got 3 takedowns and landed 116 significant strikes against slow Mike Rodriguez, right? So he's a guy that at his best, he could rack up some volume on people. He can get off on some shots. He was outlanding Mirzakhanov 43-28 when he got knocked out in that fight. So he's a guy that I think is probably going to be underrated by the market, broadly speaking. And AJ Dobson has the potential to be overrated. But then I look and I see, that he's the chalk side in this fight. And it looks like a lot of love's coming in on AJ Dobson. So for me, I'm kind of just going to wait and see here. Maybe if I got it down to Tafon at pick 'em price, I think he should probably be favored here, just based on his body of work. But I think it's a close fight overall. And I think the guy who I favor to win in the early going, if somebody was to get knocked out in the first round here, I think it's more likely that a guy like AJ Dobson scores that knockout. I think he might just have a little bit more of that dynamic power. But I feel like Tafon could probably get takedowns here. And if he enforces that kind of game plan, could turn into a really tough fight for AJ Dobson, because I think he struggles to maintain his cardio and his pace for the full 15 minutes, despite fighting to the decision twice in the UFC. He hasn't gotten a win yet. And his win on Contender Series, while somewhat impressive, was also, very chaotic. And it seems like he's still a little bit green at this level. But yeah, I think that's a fair point from Andrew. Tafon just looks slow to me. Tafon's not that fast. They tried to match him up with Jamal Pogues. They tried to match him up with Vitor Petrino. Oh my God, they didn't do him any favors. But yeah, I think Rogue Strummer hits the nail on the head for me. Losing to Mirzakhanov doesn't look bad at this point. He was beating him, true. If Nchukwi has a good weight cut and looks motivated, the odds are accurate. I think he stays on the feet, though. Yeah, I think it's very possible. I think that Nchukwi could win this fight on the feet or on the mat. And for me, that's kind of the thing that separates him as well. I would be a little bit surprised to see AJ Dobson getting to a lot of top positions here. But he is a guy that trains with, some UFC legends, right? Carlson Gracie, Ohio, stand up. So don't want to disrespect, but just think that at 31 years of age, going against a guy who's younger here with a little bit more relevant experience, I feel like I got to favor Tafon Nchukwi to get the job done here, if ever so slightly. The Patreon notes here were Tafon, 2 losses to dangerous strikers, Ulberg and Mirzakhanov, better process. Dobson, a physical freak, live to KO. Don't trust his grappling or cardio. That's how I'm feeling leading into this one, guys. Next up, we've got Josh Fremd taking on Jamie Pickett here. And this is a fight in the middleweight division between 2 guys that are both, leaving a little bit to be desired, right? Josh Fremd got back on the winning track. We, I believe, bet him against Dumas. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Pretty sure that I bet him for half a unit if my memory serves. So yeah, I bet Josh Fremd against Fluffy Hernandez for 1 unit at plus 162, and he burnt me. I felt stupid. So then I wanted not to ever bet him again, but then he was plus 190 against Cedric Dumas. Had to go back to the well there. Ended up getting some of my coins back. And I did end up profiting overall because I took 1 unit on Tresean Gore inside the distance against Josh Fremd at plus 275. Was able to cash that bet. When you look at a guy like Josh, the reason that I just can't get behind this pricing is that he's a guy who's been out wrestled. He's been knocked out in the first round, and he's been submitted in I don't want to say meme-like fashion, but in very awkward fashion there. Really treacherous position for his neck. Kind of remarkable that he got caught in a spot like that. It was very weird. So I think that both of these guys make some mistakes while they're grappling. Shout out to my guy Clint here. Says, Fremd, grappling mistakes are insane. What's Pickett by sub? Interesting. I don't think Pickett has ever submitted anybody in his career, which is funny. Scenaria says, what's up, Liam? Also, Tafon's output leaves much to be desired from what I've seen. It doesn't though, right? He's had some fights in the UFC where if you're not throwing active counters and preventing him from getting off, he's throwing over 100 significant strikes. So I think we gotta wait and see a little bit in this fight. Because the last couple guys, I mean, you can't throw strikes when somebody knocks you out, right? So he hasn't been able to get off on as much volume lately. But again, he kind of does what he needs to do in the sense that against Mirzakhanov, he wasn't outlanding him by a million, but he was outlanding him, right? I do think that Pickett is not a good fighter, right? So my lean on this fight was Fremd, but I did describe dog or pass money line pricing. I think if you were to bet on this fight from a money line perspective, there's just too much uncertainty about Josh Fremd to commit, in my view, to this kind of price. You look at his record against UFC level fighters. Gregory Rodriguez knocked him out in the first round. Anthony Hernandez decisioned him easily. Tresean Gore submitted him in the second round. That's his record against UFC level fighters. And then Cedric Dumas, he submitted in the second round. So he could definitely win. I would be curious what the ends by sub here is. I think we're going to see meme-ish grappling of all kinds in this fight. I think anybody could get subbed, but I just think Josh Fremd, with that proven track record of, basically a 1-3 record against UFC level fighters, I think he still has more to prove before he's this kind of pricing. Jamie Pickett, I think, is 2-3 against UFC level fighters. So, all right, it's like 2-5 it is. But Bo Nickel, what would he do realistically to Josh Fremd? Turn him inside out, pick him up, turn him sideways, and throw him out of the octagon? Dennis Tululian, that was a respectable enough loss. Dennis, probably a guy that could get out grappled by some guys in the UFC, but he can throw hands. He can do some damage on the feet. Kyle Daukaus, not the greatest loss in the world, but if you listen to Jamie Pickett interviews, his tongue was caught between his teeth. I mean, I'm not going to bite off my tongue for, what is it, $10,000-$20,000 that he's making in a win bonus. Yeah, I'm not biting off my tongue for that either. So I think that he probably, I cashed a bunch of money on Daukaus ITD there. Let's be very clear. I don't think I've ever bet on, I bet on Jamie Pickett against Joseph Holmes. That's the only time I've ever bet on him. 0.4 units at plus 150, and he cashed that bet. I bet Kyle Daukaus on parlays, and I bet him ITD plus 200 in that spot. And I bet Jamie Pickett and Bo Nickel fight does not start round 2 for 2.5 units. And that was almost a little dicey there for a second, but I think Jamie Pickett, not a great UFC fighter, but I just think that at the price, it's dogger pass, right? Maybe the line comes in considerably and you can get a good line on Josh Fremd, whatever you want to do. But my lean is Fremd here. I said Jamie Pickett on Patreon earlier today, about 3-4 hours ago. Jamie Pickett is no prize, but he's a BJJ brown belt. He has UFC experience and he's well built physically. He's a good athlete. He does have wins by knockout. Fremd, not a grappling ace, been KO'd, out wrestled, and submitted. And the only reason I bring up those things is because it's a plus 260, right? If we're looking at a pick'em price, we all know who we would take here. But that's why they assign odds to these things. It's a probabilistic approach to what we're doing. And just betting into guys like Josh Fremd at huge probabilities is just a way to make yourself cry in the long term. So it could work out this one time, but it's just a situation where you don't have dog or pass means you could pass, right? You don't have to bet every one of these fights. Pick your good spots. Rogue Strummer says if Pickett is a brown belt, then I am a coral belt. That's funny. And that's fair. I wonder what belt Josh Fremd is. I actually don't have that information offhand. Josh Fremd. I feel like I've bet him by sub in the past. Let's see here. Does he have a picture in the gi? Does he have a picture in the gi? I'm not seeing one. It looks like he's probably one of these guys who trains mostly no gi, but he's working with Brundage and the crew, which means that his chance of making a meme decision on the ground is there. You got to remember that. Mark says Pickett is horrendous. Don't bet Pickett. Guys, the odds are crazy, but a Pickett bet is not worth it. Fair enough, Mark. I think that's totally fair. John Anik, I've never imagined this Fremd submits Bo Nickel by guillotine. Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. Rogue says, I think Fremd is a purple belt, but he's higher level than Pickett from what I've seen. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, man. I just think that Fremd is a guy that I don't trust his process at all times. In the cage, I feel like he's prone to making some awkward decisions, but I think that J. Cole is also hitting on a narrative trend. Don't fade shit with shit. Let me pull up the Best Fight Odds website here, which will probably tank my internet connection. But in any case, I'll pull it up because I wanted to see if odds have been released for this yet. And I don't want to nerf it before I see if it has or not. It doesn't look like it. Yeah, I'll wait until the market comes out on this. But just I'm going to be curious about the fight ends by sub price. I know people in my comment section laugh at me. Guys, I have a really good ROI on sub props. They don't hit every time, but it's just like, for example, last week, I didn't hit my ends by sub prop in the main event. But if I bet on every fight that has 19 plus minutes of control time and a narrow, submission escape in round 5, I mean, that'll just be a profitable long-term angle in my view. So didn't work out for me last weekend, but I'd make the same exact bet again on the main event. And if y'all follow me on Twitter, y'all saw I had the plus 9,000 on the round 5 Sandhagen sub. And that was just a crying in your coffee ticket to have. So shout out to the ends by sub here. That's what I'll be looking at. But also, I don't love this fight from a betting perspective. I think I'll probably be passing more often than not in this situation. I'll be quick about this next one, guys. We've got Marcus McGhee taking on JP Buys. Marcus McGhee is a guy that I thought was fade worthy coming into the UFC. He proved me wrong, right? He definitely went out there and beat the tar out of what's his name, Journey Newson, made him look bad. Made him look bad in that fight, no doubt about it. And I think that was a good win for him. He looked clean in that spot. But I also think to myself, when you're getting submitted via rear naked choke quickly in the first round, like he was, you still have submission liabilities here. Maybe it was just a complete meme, but I feel like JP Buys at his best is a really good back taker. That's like what he's good at. I bet him against Montel Jackson back in the day because I was like, this guy's going to take his back. And he took his back and then he almost got KO'd like 50 times. So basically, JP Buys has not done me well in the UFC, right? I thought he was going to beat Cody Durden. He did not. He got absolutely owned in that matchup. His chin, very suspect. But I did cash. The Durden fight doesn't go to decision for a pretty good amount. So I feel like JP Buys is kind of binary, right? Oh my God, I love it. Pepe says might parlay Jamie Pickett and JP Buys. I absolutely love it. Because I think that JP Buys is live in this fight. That's the God's honest truth. I like this fight to go under. I like the fight not to go to decision. And I kind of like JP Buys on the money line. Think it's a dog or pass spot from the Patreon today. I said, a lot of these guys' fights are ending in round 1 or 2. Violent guys that make mistakes, guys that go out there and get into it. So, yeah, I just think, again, this is another guy who's very unproven, who looks like the real deal in McGhee, but I think he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, if my memory serves, and he's a guy who just got to the UFC. So I think for me, it's a JP Buys money line or pass situation. And I said Buys sneaky good back take and grappling, horrible chin. McGhee is a madman. That is my read on this fight. So shout out to the patrons. They got that a little earlier, but that's how I feel. Next up, and I think the line is coming down a little bit on JP Buys, which I understand. Next up, we've got Terrance McKinney and Mike Breeden. Terrance McKinney making a rapid turnaround here. I'm not sure how much he got beat up, in that fight with Nazim. He did a lot of controlling in the early going, and then the fight went sideways really quick in round 2, and he got submitted there. But I have to think, to myself and go back and rewatch exactly how much damage did he take. It seems like for Terrance McKinney, he's trying to parlay the fact that he's in good shape and he had a good camp for the last fight and felt good into this, and I think he kind of made a positional mistake against Nazim more than anything, more than even gassing out. Did his back defense look bad? Yes. But other than that, I kind of felt like Nazim was always going to be a tricky enough fight for him because he's a guy who comes on late. So I think that definitely some red flags here on McKinney's short notice, minus 300. Shout out. I think that's a great point. But I also think that, Terrance McKinney, what was it, 2-3 fights ago, was absolutely sending Drew Dober within an inch of the shadow realm. So I felt like, when I look at that, I feel like we could definitely see, somebody like McKinney come out here and knock out Mike Breeden in the first round. I think he's a very dangerous guy with his power and with his ability to take people down and submit them. Mike Breeden, never been submitted in MMA, but I think he could get, I think he could get cracked here. So for me, this is a spot where Mike Breeden, coming out of Marathon MMA, he's 34 years of age here. All the, measurables are going to go the way of McKinney. So straight from the Patreon, I said lean is McKinney, not laying minus 270 or McKinney ITD minus 200. So for me, that's the problem here is the price. I think McKinney wins the fight, honestly. So I don't really feel like playing Mike Breeden either. I get why people think there could be, equity in the Breeden side for sure. But I just have a bad feeling that he's going to get steamrolled here. I feel like the athleticism gap is pretty significant in this fight. So next up, we've got McKinney starts hot, big power, wrestling upside, cardio red flag in all big letters, right? All caps, cardio red flag for McKinney. Breeden, 2 KO, 1 losses, poor record in decisions, seems like cannon fodder. And, when you look at Mike Breeden, no disrespect to the guy, but I always think about why the UFC brings these guys in. He is on a streak of 2 losses. He lost to Natan Levy, who's a guy who's very inexperienced, good fighter, but pretty inexperienced. He got knocked out in the first round by Alexander Hernandez. He had a couple wins on the regional scene over ho-hum guys. He lost on the Contender Series. People will forget to Anthony Romero. He got a couple wins over, again, journeyman type guys on the regional scene. He got knocked out in the first round by 3-2 Ivy Nixon, who's now 6-4. He lost a split decision to Lucas Clay back in the day. Lucas Clay does look like he's got a good record at least, but I just am not very convinced by the Mike Breeden side. So, McKinney started sweating just reading Marathon MMA. Yo, that's fair, bro. That's fair. McKinney is 0-4 in the UFC when a fight goes past 3 minutes. That is terrible cardio. Definitely fair. And Breeden live bet, got to go crazy. I don't even disagree with you. I think that's fair. I think that would be a safer way to play the Breeden side, but you might lose out on some equity for sure. But I think that if you can get those good numbers after round one, what would stop you there? Subjack, Rogue Strummer says, I agree. I think Bias is an easy fade. McGhee is underrated. So I don't even disagree with you there. I think it's from a money line pricing standpoint, just too much juice to lay for a guy like McGhee who's been submitted in the first round. I don't parlay, but that's it. That's the thing. Everybody who parlays, y'all do whatever. I wish you guys the very best. Just the same with McKinney. I'm not a guy who's laying those big chalk favorite prices unless I think there's a clear grappling wrestling upside where they can negate a lot of the variance that comes from striking. I think McGhee is the better striker. I think he can win this due to physicality on the mat, but I think the chances of him making a mistake on the mat, is enough for me to not play him here at the chalk price. But I do think we cover multiple win conditions for both guys if we hit the violence props here. So I'm looking more at the violence than anything on that fight. But back to the fights in question, guys. I got to be frank with you, right? Francis Marshall and Isaac Dulgarian is a fight that I do not have a lot to say about because I don't know very much about Isaac Dulgarian. This is a guy who's coming in and he has not fought yet in the UFC. He has not yet fought in Dana White Contender Series. I think that is a, something I want to be, very clear about. I normally know people when they move up in competition. Maybe I've seen a fight of his before, but I've never taped this guy in depth. So I want to do that before I give you guys a half baked opinion on this fight. On the Francis Marshall side, I was a little bit surprised that he lost to Gomez there. In hindsight, kind of makes sense. Gomez is a guy who has a little bit more experience than him, similar age, much bigger frame. So I think Gomez just showed a lot with his footwork in that fight, kind of kept him moving around. It was a close fight in the end. Let's pull up the stats on that fight and discuss those a bit. Here we are. We've got Francis Marshall and Isaac Dulgarian. So Marshall's going to come in here 2 inches taller, according to the measurables on UFC stats. And he's also going to be 3 years older here. 3 years younger here. And according to the stats from his last fight, wow, 27 strikes landed to 15. Significant. Oh my goodness. I got to rewatch that fight. That sounds like the stinker of the century. But he got the win over Marcelo Rojo, a more experienced guy, but a guy who really just doesn't project high at the UFC level. More of a punching bag to the stars a little bit, with all due respect. He got the win over Connor Matthews. That was a fine win. But he's not that proven of a guy. He does have a good amateur background, Pellegrino MMA. He's a guy that puts in the work. He seems like he's got really good work ethic, but the ultimate problem there, wasn't able to hold Gomez down. Gomez is a long guy. Gomez reached to really effed with the kid. Tough not to take Marshall. I do think Isaac has potential. Who knows what he looks like in round 2 or 3? That is the ultimate question, right? Because Dulgarian is a guy that has not fought outside of the first round. So you look, you could say good or bad things about that fact, though, right? He's a dangerous finisher, no doubt about it. Kind of reminds me of a Peyton Talbot. Just because somebody hasn't won a decision doesn't mean they can't win a decision. With Talbot, we had more evidence of him going to 2 and 3. But I think that in this kind of fight, don't sleep on a wrestler like Isaac Dulgarian coming in prepared, coming in ready to go. I think his work ethic's going to be there. Everything I've heard about the guy's positive. Does train with high-level pros, right? But it's also kind of a prove-it spot here for him. So I understand why there's a little bit of plus money on his name. He's never gone the distance. Francis Marshall coming off a loss, but he does have a UFC level win. And he's gone to decision many times. So you look at his record in decision, it's just 2-1. But 3 fights going the distance That's a lot more experience later into fights. That's a lot more rounds of cage time. So interesting note here from Pepe says, took a decent play, Dulgarian plus 195, leaning into variance. I love that. I think you're going to beat the number pretty significantly. Let's take a look. Because the other thing, guys, is I tried to really keep my focus on Contender Series, making a really high quality Contender Series product. The best bets went 3 of 4 on the Contender Series yesterday, so I was very happy with those results. But I kind of just take it case by case, time by time. So now I'm looking at some of these odds, even for the first time here, today. And I'm trying to pull this up because this is a fight on Patreon. I just let people know I didn't have enough information personally to make a decision on this fight. We're looking at Francis Marshall opened a minus 188 down to a minus 163 according to the best fight odds average. I'm sure Bet Online had a different number as well. Even bigger favorite here for Marshall. So curious fight here. I think Marshall is a guy that is going to win more UFC fights. I think he's going to continue to get better, but still very young, 24 years of age. And I think it's going to be an honest fight here. So not extremely bullish for me. And until I watch Dulgarian tape, I just can't give a strong opinion here. Very interesting. Rogue Strummer says, I think Dulgarian a stronger core. He says maybe Francis bounces back, but Dulgarian got to be the better wrestler 100%. Questions come down to Dulgarian's cardio. Absolutely. I always say the ABCs say always bet on cardio, but how do you know who's got the better cardio here? Open question. So my guy Pepe's playing into variance. God bless him for it. Best of luck there. I have no bets on the fight right now. We can move to this next one here. Josh Parisian taking on Martin Buday. And Martin Buday got the win over Jake Collier. In his last fight, he beat Lucas Bresky via split decision. Got the win over Chris Barnett. So 3-fight winning streak in the UFC. Got the knockout on Contender Series as well. So he's got a couple wins now in a row, 5 of them to be exact. Josh Parisian's a guy who's won one, lost one throughout his UFC tenure, basically. And I don't think of him as a very high-level fighter personally. 2-3 in the organization. His wins over Roque Martinez by split decision. I think I bet Roque Martinez there. And Alain Badeau by ground and pound. And I think I bet Alain Badeau there. So I will never be betting on a Josh Parisian fight ever again, in all likelihood. But I do think Martin Buday is probably going to win this fight. When I look at a fight like this, I say to myself, Buday is a guy who seems to have, a little bit more urgency to what he does. He's trying to push people to the fence. Oftentimes he could get takedowns. If my memory serves on the regional scene, I believe he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt. And I think that when you look at a guy like Josh, he can come back on people that are gassing out. He could throw out a good amount of junk volume on the feet, but I just don't know how effective he is with his striking or his grappling. I just don't think of him as a very good fighter. He's going to have the longer reach here by 2 inches. He's going to be 3 years older than a Martin Buday. And I hate the pricing, but my lean is Martin Buday in this fight. My notes from Patreon, I think Parisian sucks at MMA, to be honest, but he's a tough guy. And I think that's the truth. I think he goes, where he goes on being tough, on sticking around, on throwing volume. But I think there's a little less sophistication to it. He does some spinning stuff. He takes a lot of risks, I feel, that are unnecessary as well. And I think that, there's been times it's like hard to watch his fights where he's just getting held down and pulverized. You think of a fight like the Don'Tale Mayes fight that looked like a violent crime. You think about even Parker Porter going out there and out wrestling and out grappling him. Parker has only done that to a handful of guys at the UFC level. So yeah, I think that this is a really tricky fight. But I just tend to lean towards the Buday side as being a little bit more reliable. Buday, no prize, huge heavyweight, cage push path to victory, younger, more marketable, in my opinion. That's how I felt about that one. Next up, guys, we've got a fight in the women's division. We have Montserrat Ruiz taking on Jacqueline Amorim. And I was a little disappointed, to tell you the truth. I think Jacqueline, Amorim has good skills, and I think she's a good fighter. And I thought she was going to win her last fight. I didn't end up laying the chalk there. I probably would have been seppukuing. But when you look at, what she does well, think she's a very dangerous submission grappler. I think she's got good jiu-jitsu, good process. I think her cardio left a lot to be desired. But my question is, was that a cardio dump because of adrenaline, because she thought she had the finish, because it's her UFC debut? Or is it just that she doesn't have the cardio to go the full hard 15 in the UFC? And I think that, this will be another data point in that equation. But here's the thing. I don't think of Montserrat Ruiz as a very high level talent. I feel like Cheyenne Baez went out there and Cheyenne Velismas, whatever you want to call her, went out there and dropped the ball in that fight. I felt like that was a winnable fight for her. She made the same mistakes over and over. She got caught in a head and arm situation. Am I going to blame, this girl for losing to Amanda Lemos via knockout? No, I'm certainly not going to blame her for that. I think she's a girl that likes to go out there and throw down, but she hasn't really faced somebody that could do what I think Jacqueline could do in the jiu-jitsu. So I think Jacqueline is probably going to take her down and submit her in the very early going. And I think there's a chance she could TKO her as well. So I feel like this is not a fight where, again, I would be laying a favorite price straight from the Patreon, guys. Lean Jacqueline Amorim minus 238 is price prohibitive. All round one wins. I think Amorim has high level skills, elite grappling. Cardio isn't great, but that also could have been an adrenaline dump or UFC jitters. Ruiz is a tough girl, not so much on the skill side. That head and arm throw is nice, but that's also, not a technique that's going to work against Jacqueline Amorim. Straight up. Like, she will take your back if you do that, for sure. Could win an extended fight, I suppose. That was my breakdown here. I think that's her path. I think she's got to extend this girl. But I think Amorim, she had a lot of plaudits from her training partners coming in that she's one of the best in the room, that her grappling is ferocious and insane. She also has knockout wins, I believe, if my memory serves. So I feel like Jacqueline Amorim, I'm not laying that money line price, but I think she's going to come through in this fight. I do think she's going to win, and I think she's probably going to finish Montserrat Ruiz. Next up, we've got Damone Blackshear and Jose Johnson. This one was put together on really short notice. I did not have, thoughts for this fight or the Juliana Miller Luana Santos fight on Patreon. And the reason being, I don't know enough about one or both of the fighters to write about it. So in the case of Juliana Miller and Luana Santos, I don't know anything about Luana Santos, so I won't pretend to. I just got to do some due diligence on that side. As far as Jose Johnson goes, I know he's fought approximately at the UFC level for a while, getting the win over Mo Miller, that's a serious win, good win. Getting the win over Jack Cartwright on Contender Series, it was a good win, but it's also a win that, he wasn't able to get signed off of that win. I don't believe. If he was, or actually maybe he was, but in any case, had, canceled bouts against Vince Morales. He withdrew from that fight. Medical issue against Garrett Armfield in the UFC booking. So he struggled to make it to the octagon, let's say. Damone Blackshear on the other side, he surprised me, guys. I thought Luan Lacerda was going to give him an honest fight. I thought Luan Lacerda was a guy that, showed off some ability to compete hard for 15 minutes against Cody Stamann, and he got absolutely audited, by Damone Blackshear. Really good performance there. The Yusuf Zalal fight, I thought was the big concern for me because Yusuf Zalal was able to storm back on him in round 3. I thought get a 10-8 in that fight, if my memory serves. Blackshear, he's run into some adversity, but you look at the quality of his losses. This is the one thing that stood out to me. He lost to Farid Basharat, Danny Sabatello, who was on hard times, no doubt about it after that loss, but Magomed Magomedov is the truth, so no skin off his nose there. Pat Sabatini, right? Another elite grappler, good wrestler, great top game. Chris Mutino. Okay, maybe not the best loss in the world, but it was back in 2018. Both of them had a similar level of experience. Mutino's a guy that we know his toughness. We know what he's willing to go through to win a fight. So, maybe we give that one a pass. Keith Richardson, he lost a split decision. These are all back in 2017. So basically, since 2018, his only losses are Sabatini, Sabatello, and Basharat. Those are good fighters. I can't really take too much away from that. Jose Johnson, let's go look at his resume. He lost to Manny Martinez via knockout in the first round. That's kind of Manny Martinez's path, but still, would have liked to see a better result there for him. Lost to Ronnie Lawrence via unanimous decision. Ronnie Lawrence at his best, very talented prospect. been dealing with a lot. We wish him the very best. Prayers up for Ronnie Lawrence. If you guys haven't seen what he's dealing with, big prayers to him and his family. He's been getting staph on a reoccurring basis very frequently, so never want to hear that. But then prior to that, he lost to Armando Villarreal in 2018, Levi Moles via sub in 2018, Casey Jones via sub in 2017, Michael McDonald via sub in 2016. He has an extensive amateur background. Jose Johnson, million fights here. But I just feel like this is the kind of guy that Blackshear can beat. I feel like Blackshear is a guy that's got his own wrestling and grappling. And if you can outdo him there, if you could beat him in the wrestling and the grappling, like a Fremd, like, a Danny Sabatello, like a Pat Sabatini, if you can out wrestle this guy, then, maybe he could get the win. But I don't know if Jose Johnson's going to be able to do that. Andrew says Jose Johnson is good, dude. I'm going to watch more. I'm going to watch more tape on Jose Johnson, because that's the truth, is I don't know as much about his side, but I just have, this is for me too. The problem, Pepe, is the Johnson poor takedown defense. I think that is his real problem. I think that when you look at how Damon Blackshear wins fights, I think it's the kind of way that Jose Johnson loses fights. Wow, great note. Oh my, Rogue Strummer coming in with the heat. Says Blackshear's birthday, day of the fight. Absolutely brilliant. Great stuff, my man. Great shout. I will take that under advisement as well. So the last fight that we have to discuss here, guys, I'm just not going to give a strong opinion on that one until I have more information, right? I don't want to give you guys a forced opinion. Juliana Miller and Luana Santos. Juliana Miller looked not good in her last fight, right? She's very green, very inexperienced. She's got a 5-0 amateur record. She's got a bunch of grappling matches. She's got some exhibition fights, so she's not as inexperienced as she looks. But Veronica Hardy gave her the ye old tour of the octagon, right? She lost to Claire Guthrie back in 2021 via unanimous decision. Not going to hold that against her too much, but again, you just have to ask yourself, how ready is she for this level? And let's pull up the odds here. Luana Santos is favored in this fight. So now I have to ask myself, who the hell is Luana Santos? Luana Santos, 5-1. Don't know the team she's representing. 2-1 in the LFA. Lost a split decision to Jenna Bishop, who I've heard the name before. Looking at her record, nothing stands out to me as insane, except for they were so specific with the Kesagatami leg Americana. I mean, I need to see that move. I'll tell you what, I got to go back and watch the Marjorie Barragan fight. But when I look at this, I say to myself, Juliana Miller probably fancies herself a grappler a little bit. She did get the ground and pound finish over Brogan Walker, did what Iasmin Lucindo failed to do. Crazy. So honestly, guys, I just have to watch her fights to really know what to expect. But Juliana Miller, not a girl that I would bet at chalk, that's for sure. I don't know enough about Luana Santos to have decided. So there you have it, guys. That's my first look at UFC Vegas 78. I'm going to be back with bets and banter. That'll be tomorrow. Stay tuned for the time. Get subscribed to the channel if you're not already to make sure that you're there. Hit the notification bell if you want to be here when we start live. I always say we got the sharpest chat in the game, so truly appreciate each and every one of you guys that choose to take part, that choose to be here, that choose to comment, people that fly on the wall. I just want to listen. Appreciate you too. If you guys are interested, this show gets put out as a podcast as well. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Liam Picks Fights. That's all you got to search. Should be able to easily find it. It's my first look as well as my bets and banter show each week, uploaded for podcast listeners there as well. So appreciate you guys for the support. No matter where you listen, no matter where you hear the show, I truly appreciate it. Seems like the internet held up today. Knock on wood. I did a bunch of tests before the show, always trying to get better with that, guys. Just dealing with some tech issues that are kind of outside my control. So bear with me on those. Appreciate you guys for all the patience that you guys show. Shout out to Pepe. Says, I noticed the main event, two Brazilians to have thoughts they are trying to showcase Amorim and Santos earlier in the card. Oh, my brother, if we could stop some Brazilian hate together, that would make me happy. Always love that. Shout out to our guy, Shady Beach Bum says, F the limey, keep up the ginger abuse. Oh, my man. Shots fired. Grateful Dude says, appreciate the breakdowns. Appreciate you big time, brother. Thank you. Andrew says, talking about Instagrams for research. Yeah, definitely something I like to take a look at, brother. I like to look at as much as I can. Anything I can find, brother. No stone left unturned, as our guy MMA Adam Martin says. XBL on Twitch. Our guy Brian says, I'm fly on the wall today. Appreciate your thoughts. Most of all, you, Liam. Appreciate you, Brian. And appreciate each and every one of you guys. God bless you all. I hope that you guys enjoy the fights. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, you could fire those away in the comment section below. If you guys want to get at me, you can find me on social media everywhere at LiamPicksFights. You could find the Patreon, these write-ups. Some of my thoughts were available 3-4 hours ago. Lines do move, so when I'm writing about these things, that's the lines that I'm talking about. And those are a little bit subject to change, but just want you guys to know, I appreciate each and every one of you guys for the support. I hope to see you guys all again next time, because we're going to have all the same fun again. Take care, everybody. Thanks.